Hi everyone, hope you're doing all right. So I've had a lot of requests for a video on self-death and afterlife from Year 2 philosophy. Now it's a big topic, but it's not one to panic about. Quite often people do panic about this because it seems like a huge topic, but I've broken it down for you. I'm actually going to do this in 3 parts. So I'll take you through part 1, which covers about the first third of the material. And then you can check out parts 2 and 3 because they'll go live today as well. Before we get into it, I do want to reassure you a little bit about this topic, because in the textbook and even in the revision guide, it can seem like it covers a vast amount of areas. And it does, but there's only 3 areas that they can set questions on. So the questions for this topic are really actually quite limited. So part 1, which is going to be this video, is going to take you through ideas about the nature and existence of the soul, focusing particularly on Descartes. Part 2 is going to look at the body-soul relationship, and part 3 is going to look at the possibility of continuing personal existence after death. That's it. That's all they can ask about. And I've actually put some practice questions in to the videos so you can have a think about what might come up. Something that's super important for you to know, though, that might actually make your revision a lot easier: the only scholar who can appear in questions is Descartes. So there's lots and lots and lots of scholars who are kind of name checked in this topic, who have got ideas that we're going to discuss, and that's fine. It's definitely worth knowing them, but the only one you can be asked about is Descartes. In other words, with someone like Plato, you can absolutely talk about Plato in your answers, but because Plato is not directly prescribed for study, you can't be penalised if you don't talk about Plato. I hope that makes sense. Another thing that's worth putting on your radar is that this topic links to a lot of others. So this is very much worth considering because it may be something that comes up in dialogues. So it's got links to evil and suffering, in the sense that if there's life after death, does it make it worthwhile that we suffer during this life? Religious language is an issue. What do we mean when we're talking about souls? What do we mean when we're talking about the mind? Free will and moral responsibility, this is big. Is it in our control whether we go to an afterlife or not? If we are just sort of DNA machines in a fully deterministic universe, do we have free will at all? If we're made in the image of God, what does this tell us about God? By looking at how we are, you know, are we bodies and souls? Are we just bodies? What does that tell us about God? And obviously this will link to all the religious views of life after death you've studied. Now I'm going to be looking at this pretty much through the lens of Christianity, because Christianity is what most people do for A level, but if you've studied other religions, there'll be stuff in here that's useful for that too. All right, so part 1 of this topic is about the nature of the soul. What do we mean when we talk about the soul? So here's what I think could be a couple of questions. Examine differing philosophical ideas about the nature of human souls. That's nice because it's just asking you to unpack some different views about the soul. So if I was doing that, I would probably do Plato. I would definitely do Descartes. And then the second one, dualism gives a correct understanding of the nature of the soul. Now you do have to know what dualism is, but that's okay because I'm going to take you through it and you probably already know it anyway. So that's the sort of thing that will come up. You'll see from that that it is quite broad. They don't tend to be super specific with the questions in this topic. Right, let's have a look at dualism. So this is essentially saying that the body and soul are separate. So when the body dies, the soul lives on in some way. So you are a body and you are a soul. And while you are alive, the two of them interact together and kind of work together. But then when your body dies, your soul will go and live on in some way. So the first person to really make this argument was Plato, back in ancient Greece. He argued that the soul belonged to the world of the forms. Now, the world of the forms was kind of the real world, not the world we live in. It was the world of perfection and true goodness. And Plato thought that souls kind of came down from the world of the forms to live in bodies on this world. And then when we died, they returned to the world of the forms. So Plato's quite a long time before Christianity, but nevertheless, this thinking kind of fits with some ideas that we get in the New Testament about this earth not really being the true home of your soul. The idea that your soul actually belongs somewhere else, and when you die, your soul gets to go there. So there's a line from, this is not from the Bible, this is from a very old Christian prayer that's often said at funerals: "Go forth upon your journey from this world, O Christian soul." So we can see from this that there's some similarities, that, you know, some dualist thinking has made its way into Christianity. And Plato's ideas are lovely. You know, he's got some gorgeous ideas about the world of the forms and goodness and souls kind of forgetting and remembering what's really good. But there's a massive problem with it all, which is that there is absolutely no good evidence to support that there is a world of the forms, or indeed that there is a soul that survives the death of the body. This lack of evidence is also a problem that we're going to have with Descartes. Let's have a look at him. Descartes got 3 reasons for thinking that bodies and souls were separate. The first one is the most famous. This is cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. So Descartes really agonized over this. How could he know that anything was real? And he did this through this process of doubting. So he could doubt everything around him because it could be a trick. He could even doubt that he had a body. But because there was something there doing the doubting, he couldn't doubt that he had a mind. So this was what kind of really started him off on this path of dualist thinking. He could doubt his body, but he could not doubt his mind. Therefore, they must be different. He also thought about the idea that bodies take up space. So your body takes up space, it's observable, it's physical, but mental states don't. So your thoughts don't take up any space. Therefore, they must be different. There must be 2 different kinds of stuff. And then thirdly, he could perceive his body and his thought processes separately. And he thought that this must be the way that God had done it. This must be the way that God had created us, so that we could perceive our bodies and our thoughts in 2 different ways. And this led him to the conclusion that the true he, which he counted as his soul or his mind, and his body could exist apart from each other. So he could almost imagine himself without a body, if that makes sense. It's worth saying at this point, Descartes uses terms like soul and mind pretty much interchangeably. So when he's talking about the soul, he's talking about the mind, and vice versa. They're not really, really different. So this led him to believe that your soul is one kind of stuff and your body is another kind of stuff. Your body is spatial and physical. Your mind or your soul is non-spatial and non-physical. Therefore, they're 2 different kinds of stuff that work together. But the thing is, he might have been wrong about a lot of this. And to be fair to him, that's because he didn't know a lot of what we now know about how the brain works, even though we still don't know everything. Far from it. So firstly, if consciousness is a product of the brain, then it's simply a physical process because the brain is part of the body. So what Descartes was talking about as the soul, maybe that is just the mind, maybe it is just our consciousness. And if our consciousness is produced by the brain, then it's completely linked to the brain, and it makes no sense to say that it could survive without the brain because the brain is part of the body. Descartes talks about the mind and the brain as if they're 2 completely different things, but modern neuroscience shows that there's a clear relationship between them. You really can't separate them in any meaningful way. You know, there's not a brain scientist who would really take you seriously if you tried to argue that the mind has nothing to do with the brain. We know that it is. Also, and this is possibly the tricky one to get your head around personally, the self may just be an illusion. So there's a process of thinking that goes on for sure, but there's no separate I who thinks. A lot of these arguments about dualism can be quite tricky because for many people, we feel like we do experience ourselves in quite a dualist way. We see our body as separate from our mind. We maybe understand ourselves as two different kinds of stuff. And because we feel that way, it can be quite powerful and quite convincing. But when we really look at it philosophically, there's not a lot of evidence to support that, as we can see with Descartes here. So moving on from Descartes' dualism for a moment, we go into some other views of the nature of the soul. And this is where we have to start looking at the idea that maybe the soul isn't separate in any way, or even that it doesn't exist. So we've got monism, materialism, and physicalism. These views don't agree with dualism. They hold that we are only one substance. There isn't anything that can survive the death of the body. So death is really the end. Aristotle thought that the soul was a thing, but it wasn't a separate thing. He thought that your soul was what gave your body its life. So the word he used for that was anima. So it's almost like animation. Your soul is what brings you to life. But because it's so inextricably linked to your body, it can't continue after death. So that's a big difference there from dualism. Then we fast forward into the modern age and we've got people like Richard Dawkins, who you'll have come across before. He thought that all processes of being human were physical and life ends at death, so there can be no soul. Physicalism is a kind of similar understanding. We call it physicalism because it's saying that everything to do with humans is physical. It's quite reductive though. There's no kind of spiritual understanding in physicalism. So physicalism holds that there's no body and soul relationship. Water reduces to H2O, mind reduces to brain. This is what I mean about it's quite reductionist. Okay, hopefully that's helped you get your head around the first bit of the topic. Please do check out parts 2 and 3 and feel free to leave me a comment if you've got any questions or if you want anything clarifying about this topic. All right, thanks for watching. See you soon.